The text message came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was 3 states away, sitting in a cramped hotel room in Denver, when my phone buzzed with those 16 words that confirmed everything I'd suspected for months. "Thanks for letting me crash at your place while you're out of town. Mom said you wouldn't mind. Jess." I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Out of town. That's what they told her. Not that I'd been systematically forced out of my own life. Not that they'd made it impossible for me to stay. Just a convenient little vacation that warranted handing over my keys to my younger sister like I was some absent landlord. The injustice of it burned through me like acid. For 26 years, I'd been the responsible one, the one who got good grades, who worked 2 jobs through college, who never asked for anything. When Dad lost his job 3 years ago, I was the one who quietly helped with their mortgage payments. When Mom needed surgery, I was there, juggling my own bills to make sure they had what they needed. And when Jessica, sweet, artistic, perpetually struggling Jessica, needed help, I'd opened my doors, my wallet, my life to her more times than I could count. But apparently, none of that mattered when Jessica decided she wanted my apartment. It had started small, like these things always do. Jessica had been going through another rough patch, her third artistic crisis in 2 years, which was code for "can't hold a job." She'd moved back in with our parents after her latest relationship imploded, but their house felt too small, too suffocating for her creative energy. So naturally, she started spending time at my place. At first, I didn't mind. I worked long hours at the marketing firm, and it was nice knowing someone was there, that the apartment wasn't sitting empty. Jessica would cook dinner sometimes, and we'd watch movies like we used to when we were kids. It felt good, having my sister back in my life in a meaningful way. But then, the boundaries started shifting. She began bringing friends over without asking. My Netflix account suddenly had profiles I didn't recognize. My groceries disappeared faster than I could replace them. When I mentioned it, Jessica would flash that smile that had gotten her out of trouble since childhood and say something about how sisters share everything, right? The breaking point should have been when I came home to find she'd rearranged my entire living room to better suit her painting setup. My furniture pushed against the walls, her easels and canvases taking over the center of the space. When I protested, she cried. Actual tears about how I didn't support her art, how I didn't understand what it meant to be creative, how the lighting in my apartment was perfect for her work. And like an idiot, I apologized. That's when our parents got involved. The family dinner was supposed to be about Mom's birthday, but it quickly became an intervention about my attitude. Problem. Jessica had painted me as the controlling older sister who begrudged her younger sibling's success. She was on the verge of a breakthrough, she told them, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her art was finally gaining recognition, but she needed space to work, and I was being selfish. "You have that whole apartment to yourself," Mom said, her voice taking on that disappointed tone that had shaped my childhood. "Would it kill you to share a little?" "She's family, honey," Dad added. "Family looks out for each other." The conversation spiraled from there. Somehow, my legitimate concerns about boundaries became evidence of my jealousy. My attempts to explain the situation were reframed as attacks on Jessica's character. By the end of the evening, I'd been painted as the villain in my own story. That's when the campaign began in earnest. Suddenly, Jessica was at every family gathering, telling stories about her improved art sales, which I later discovered were wildly exaggerated. She'd mention casually how much better she was sleeping in my guest room, how the natural light in my apartment was inspiring her best work yet. Our parents ate it up, proud of their artistic daughter who was finally getting her life together. Meanwhile, I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. Jessica's belongings multiplied like invasive species, her clothes in my closet, her food in my fridge, her schedule dictating when I could use my own living spaces. When I tried to reclaim some territory, there were tears, phone calls to our parents, accusations of cruelty. The final straw came when I discovered she'd been showing my apartment to potential roommates, telling them I was moving out and she'd be taking over the lease. She hadn't asked me, hadn't even mentioned it. She'd simply decided that my home was now hers and had begun the process of erasing me from it entirely. When I confronted her, the mask finally slipped. "Oh, come on, Emma," she said, not even looking up from her painting. "We both know you can't afford this place on your own anymore. Not with all the help you've been giving Mom and Dad. This is actually helping you out." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She'd been watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. She knew about the financial strain I'd been under, knew I'd been struggling to maintain the lifestyle I'd built while still supporting our family, and instead of offering help or understanding, she'd seen an opportunity. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my landlord, a kind older man named Mr. Chen, who'd always appreciated that I paid rent early and kept the place immaculate. I explained the situation carefully, professionally. He was sympathetic and, more importantly, legally savvy. We worked out an arrangement that would protect both of us. The second call was to my boss, Sarah Martinez, who I'd worked closely with for 4 years. I'd been putting in extra hours for months, building up goodwill and proving my value to the company. When I mentioned the possibility of working remotely from our Denver branch for a while, she was surprisingly receptive. The cost of living was lower there, and they'd been wanting to expand their Western operations. The third call was to my college roommate, David, who'd moved to Denver 2 years ago and had been begging me to visit ever since. When I asked if he knew of any short-term housing options, he practically shouted with excitement. "Emma, you can stay with me as long as you need. I've been rattling around this house alone for months. When can you get here?" I gave myself 2 weeks to execute the plan. During those 14 days, I became a ghost in my own life. I started moving things out gradually: important documents, sentimental items, my best clothes. I told Jessica I was decluttering, selling things I didn't need anymore. She was so focused on her paintings that she barely noticed entire bookshelves emptying, photo albums disappearing, my grandmother's jewelry box vanishing from my dresser. I arranged for remote access to all my accounts, changed my addresses with the bank and credit card companies, and methodically removed every trace of my real life from the apartment. What I left behind was a carefully curated collection of items: furniture I'd been meaning to replace, clothes I never wore, books I'd never reread. The hardest part was maintaining the performance, smiling at family dinners while Jessica talked about her plans for our apartment, nodding sympathetically when she complained about needing more storage space for her art supplies, pretending not to notice when she started referring to my bedroom as her new studio. On the Thursday before I left, I had lunch with our parents. They seemed excited, proud of how Jessica was thriving, relieved that their daughters were finally getting along. Mom mentioned how mature it was of me to be so supportive of Jessica's career. "You're setting such a good example," she said, patting my hand across the restaurant table. "This is what family is about." I smiled and agreed, my heart breaking a little at how completely they'd bought into Jessica's narrative. The morning I left, Jessica was at one of her art classes. I loaded the last of my real belongings into my car, took one final walk through the apartment that had been my sanctuary for 3 years, and locked the door behind me. I left my keys on the kitchen counter, along with a note that I'd spent considerable time crafting. "Jess, hope you enjoy the space. Make sure to read the lease carefully. Emma." I was halfway to Denver when the first confused text arrived. "Em, did you leave your keys here by mistake? I can drop them off at work." I didn't respond. I was driving through Kansas, windows down, feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone kept buzzing, but I'd turned off the sound. There would be time for conversations later. It took 3 days for the full realization to hit. I was settled into David's guest room, working remotely from his kitchen table with the Rocky Mountains visible through the window, when my phone exploded with messages. First Jessica, then my parents, then Jessica again, each message more frantic than the last. Emma, call me right now. There's been some kind of mistake. The landlord says you terminated your lease? That's impossible. Mom says you moved without telling anyone? This is insane. You can't just leave. We had an agreement. That last one made me laugh out loud. An agreement. As if I'd had any say in the arrangement that had slowly strangled my independence. I waited until evening to call my parents. Mom answered on the first ring. Emma Louise, what in the world is going on? Jessica is hysterical. She says you moved out without telling anyone and that she might be in legal trouble? I took a deep breath, settling into David's comfortable couch with a cup of coffee and a view of the sunset over the mountains. I did move, Mom. I got a great opportunity to transfer to our Denver office, and I took it. But what about Jessica? She's been depending on that apartment. For what? I was never consulted about any long-term arrangement. She's been staying in my guest room sometimes, but it's my apartment. My lease, my responsibility. The silence on the other end was telling. But we thought. Jessica said you two had worked something out, that you were going to let her take over the lease. Jessica said a lot of things, apparently. Did she mention that she was trying to find roommates to replace me, without asking me first? Or that she'd been telling people I was moving out when I'd never said any such thing? Another pause. Longer this time. Honey, there must be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is that you all assumed you could make decisions about my life without including me in the conversation. The phone erupted in background noise, Jessica grabbing the phone from Mom, her voice shrill and desperate. Emma, you have to fix this. The landlord says I'm not on the lease, that I have no legal right to be here. He's giving me 3 days to get out or he'll call the police. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. That sounds like something you should have considered before you started making long-term plans for someone else's apartment. But I have nowhere to go. All my art supplies are there, my paintings. You can move them. You have 3 days, which is more than you gave me when you decided to take over my home. This is insane. You're my sister. Yes, I am, and you treated me like a doormat. The phone went quiet except for Jessica's sobbing. When Mom came back on the line, her voice was different. Smaller. Emma, please. She's your sister. Surely you can work something out. I worked something out, Mom. I got myself out of a situation where my own family was conspiring to push me out of my own life. You want to help Jessica? Help her, but don't expect me to set myself on fire to keep her warm anymore. I hung up and turned off my phone. Over the next week, the messages piled up. Jessica's went through the entire spectrum of manipulation, rage, bargaining, guilt, threats, and finally, desperate pleading. My parents' messages were more measured but equally predictable. They couldn't understand how I could abandon family like this, how I could be so cruel. David, who'd been watching this drama unfold with the fascination of someone who'd grown up as an only child, finally asked the question that had been lurking in the back of my mind. Do you think she actually believed she could just take your apartment? Like, did she really think that was how it would work? I considered this while we hiked through the foothills, Denver sprawling out below us in the crisp morning air. I think she believed our parents would pressure me into giving her what she wanted. It had worked before, with smaller things. And I think she counted on me being too conflict-averse to actually fight back. But you did fight back. Just not the way she expected. I didn't fight at all, really. I just left. Removed myself from the situation entirely. That was the beauty of it, I realized. Jessica had been prepared for tears, arguments, family meetings where she could play the victim. She'd been counting on my pattern of eventually giving in to keep the peace. What she hadn't anticipated was that I might simply choose not to play the game at all. The climax came 2 weeks after I'd left, when Jessica called me from a hotel room at 2 a.m., completely broken. "Emma, please. I'll do anything. I lost the art class job because I couldn't focus, and I can't afford to store all my paintings. Some of them are getting damaged. Mom and Dad's house doesn't have space, and I can't ask anyone else because I'm too embarrassed to explain what happened." Her voice was raw, exhausted. Gone was the manipulative sweetness, the calculated tears. This was just my little sister, scared and alone, and finally understanding the consequences of her actions. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was Jessica, who'd built pillow forts with me when we were kids, who'd cried on my shoulder through every heartbreak. The Jessica who'd painted me a beautiful portrait for my college graduation, who used to call me her hero. But then I remembered the casual cruelty in her voice when she'd dismissed my struggles, the way she'd turned our parents against me, the months of feeling like a stranger in my own life. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Jess. I really am. But actions have consequences. Please don't talk to me like I'm a child. I know I messed up, okay? I know I handled things badly, but we're family. Family forgives each other. Family also treats each other with respect. They ask before they take. They consider each other's feelings before they make life-changing decisions." She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I really believed it would all work out. I thought you'd be happier in a smaller place, that you were struggling anyway, and this would be better for everyone." "Did you think that, Jess? Or did you just tell yourself that to make it easier to take what you wanted?" The silence stretched between us. 1,200 miles of distance and years of accumulated hurt. "I don't know," she finally whispered. "I don't know anymore." That honesty hit me harder than all her manipulation had. For the first time in months, I heard my real sister in her voice. "Here's what I know," I said, looking out at the Denver skyline glittering in the darkness. "I'm building a good life here. I have a job I love, friends who respect my boundaries, and space that's actually mine. I'm not coming back to clean up this mess." "So that's it? We're just done?" "We're done with the old dynamic, where I sacrifice everything to make your life easier. If you want to rebuild something real between us, it has to be built on equal ground." "I don't know how to do that." "Then you'd better figure it out." The aftermath unfolded slowly, in bits and pieces filtered through social media and mutual family friends. Jessica moved back in with our parents, her paintings stored in their garage. She got a job at a local coffee shop. Not her dream, but steady income. She started therapy, something she posted about obliquely on Instagram with captions about personal growth and taking accountability. My parents went through their own reckoning. Mom called me a month after everything fell apart, her voice tentative and strange. "I want to understand what happened, Emma. Really understand, not just Jessica's version." We talked for 2 hours. I laid out the timeline carefully, without anger or accusation, just facts. The gradual invasion of my space. The family dinners where my concerns were dismissed. The discovery that Jessica was planning to replace me without consultation. "I feel like we failed you," Mom said finally. "We were so focused on helping Jessica that we didn't see how we were hurting you." "You didn't fail me, Mom. You made choices based on incomplete information, but those choices had consequences, and we all have to live with them." Dad was harder to reach. His apology, when it came, was awkward and formal, delivered through Mom like a diplomatic message. But it was something. As for me, I flourished in Denver, The marketing firm's expansion went better than anyone expected, largely due to my insights about the local market. Sarah offered me a permanent position with a significant raise. I found my own apartment, a bright one-bedroom with mountain views and space for the art studio I'd always dreamed of but never prioritized. I started painting again, something I'd abandoned in college for more practical pursuits. It turns out I'd inherited some of the artistic genes that had made Jessica special, but I'd been too busy supporting everyone else to develop them. The story could have ended there, with me thriving in my new life while Jessica learned hard lessons about consequences. It would have been a clean narrative about justice served and family dynamics corrected. But life is messier than stories. 6 months after I left, Jessica sent me a package. No return address, no note, just a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. When I unwrapped it, I found a painting of our childhood bedroom, rendered in her distinctive style but with a difference. Instead of the idealized, nostalgic vision she usually created, this one showed the room honestly. My side, neat and organized, crowded with books and achievement awards. Her side, chaotic with art supplies and half-finished projects. Both sides real, both sides valued. At the bottom, in her careful script, "I see you now." I hung it in my bedroom, and sometimes I'd catch sight of it and feel something complicated settle in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but recognition. Jessica had finally seen me as a person rather than a convenience, and that was something. The real resolution came a year later when Jessica called me on my birthday. Not to ask for anything, not to manipulate or cajole, just to wish me happy birthday and tell me she was proud of how I'd handled everything. "I was so angry at first," she said, her voice steady and mature in a way I'd never heard before. "But my therapist helped me understand that you weren't punishing me. You were protecting yourself. And I needed to learn that other people's protection isn't something I'm entitled to." "How are you doing, Jess?" "Really? Better. Different. I'm sharing an apartment with 2 roommates, and I actually contribute to the household instead of just taking up space. I'm painting again, but on my own terms, in my own time. And I'm working on being the kind of person who deserves the good things in her life instead of just expecting them." We talked for an hour, carefully, like people learning a new language. When we hung up, I realized that the revenge I'd taken, the clean, calculated removal of myself from their manipulation, had given us something unexpected. It had forced Jessica to grow up, forced my parents to examine their assumptions, and given me the space to become who I was meant to be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be diminished, walking away with your dignity intact, and building something beautiful out of the ashes of what you've left behind. I never moved back to my old city, never resumed the old patterns that had made me complicit in my own erasure. Instead, I built a life in Denver that was entirely mine, friendships based on mutual respect, work that challenged and fulfilled me, creative pursuits that fed my soul instead of draining it. And sometimes, late at night when the mountain air was crisp and clear, I'd think about that text message that started it all. "Thanks for letting me crash at your place while you're out of town." Jessica had been right about one thing. I was out of town. I'd just traveled a lot farther than any of them had imagined, and I'd found exactly what I was looking for in the distance.